Well, we're pretty active.
Yep, we are.
You'll make a lot of noise for people to the floor.
Yep,
Oh.
lots of cheering.
In the world, I thought there were new leaves coming,
I'm good.
but they keep
All right.
getting longer and longer.
All right, good morning. Welcome. Excited to have y'all here. I'm gonna open in prayer, and then we're gonna look at something that's a little bit different from last week, because last week was kind of obvious, and this week's a little bit less obvious. So I'm gonna open in prayer. If you would pray with me. Lord, we come before you. We ask that you would be present here, that you would inform our minds as well as our hearts, and that we would see you this morning, Lord. In your name, amen.
Amen.
All right, so last week we talked about online stuff. We talked about, COVID forced churches online, and that as a result of that, what's going to happen is as we move through COVID and we get kind of on the other side, if there is another side, that churches are going to, by default, have to make some sort of decisions. And some churches are going to just go for it and keep going online, keep doing it, make it better. And that's what our plan is at Holy Apostles, is to have more of an online presence, just continue down that road. Some churches are just going to continue what they're doing and not change anything. They're not going to make it better. They're not going to do less. They're just going to keep doing. And a lot of churches are going to end up just walking away from the whole thing and going back to the way that it was because, well, COVID's over. And so that's one of the things that churches have to wrestle with. Here's one that you might not be aware of. But we're seeing it in churches all over the place. In fact, I just had a conversation with Mickey like yesterday, who told me that her church is going down to one service. No, I'm not going to tell you why, because we're not there yet. But their church is going down to one service. This was one of the fastest growing churches in the diocese before COVID. Now, they're smaller than we are. And so that gives you an idea of the size of church. I'd say, probably somewhere around 80 on a Sunday. But they hired a rector who's a very good rector, and they were growing. There was an excitement and movement in this church. And 2 years into COVID, they are going back to one service. What's forcing the church to go back? You can see this taking place at all kinds of churches, all over the place, where they're scaling down. We've got to go back, and so there's a not so obvious shift that's taking place, and so one of the things, because it's not obvious, one of the things that we have to do is, first of all, we've got to figure out, is this a shift that we can live with? Or is this a shift that we need to actually push back, dig our heels in, and fight against? Because, not every change in the church is a good change. Some changes are bad changes. Some changes you actually need to dig your heels in and say, no, we're not going down this road. So one of the things the church has to figure out is, this new shift, is this something we can live with? Or is this something we need to fight? And then we need to figure out, how do we live with it, or how do we fight against it? So what's the shift? And the shift that's taking place in the church is that you have a movement away from small church into big church. And what I mean by small church and big church is not in terms of size of building or even size of people. What I mean by big church, small church, has more to do with its organization and its structure. And you're seeing a shift away from a small church structure to a big church structure. And maybe that's still confusing. So let's unpack it this way. You've heard the phrase big government, and you've heard the phrase small government, yeah? And you all know that the size of the government is the same, right? Whenever they use those phrases, the size of the government hasn't necessarily changed. They're talking about how much the government as a whole is involved doing things, and how much the government is away and the people are doing things, right? So the same principle you can apply to the church. Big church is how much is being done by the staff of a church and how much is being done by the people of the church. And what you're seeing is you're seeing a shift in the church where the people are taking a step back and the church, the office, this paid staff are taking on more. So that's what I mean by a shift from big church or from small church to big church. The church, as far as its structure and organization, is running off of the staff rather than the people. So does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Todd, does that mean that just that there are fewer people?
To some degree. It means yes, that there are fewer people. It also means that the fewer people are not as willing to jump in. And I'm gonna get to that in a bit, which is why I'm a little bit hesitant. It means several things. There are several reasons for it. But what you'll find is a movement away from people engagement, people ministries, to church ministries being run by the staff. I'll give you a really good example of this because it just happened, and it just happened here. When we did funerals in the past, we had an entire team at Holy Apostles that set up, that ran the thing, that were here present working the funeral. On Sunday, we had Deanna, Nancy, and we paid them. That's a big difference. That's a huge difference to how funerals are done now at Holy Apostles. We used to have a team of volunteers that came in and ran the funerals, ran Wednesday night, ran all the activities that we did, set up, tear down, do the dishes, everything. And now we pay Nancy and Deanna to come in and do it. So I haven't made any judgment calls on whether that's right or wrong. I'm just presenting it as that's where we are. And part of the reason why Mickey's Church has gone down to one service is that they don't have anybody to serve and to set up and to do the things that they need done to run two services. So a lot of it just falls on the office and the clergy. Now, part of the greatness of Holy Apostles is that you have a very small staff, and none of them are slackers. And all of them are tremendously hardworking. Because I don't do well with people that I have to micromanage, and I don't do well with people who don't just jump in and get things done. So we only have those people. And so Nancy and Deanna can run the show, no problem. Where there was, 4 or 5 people, now it's Nancy and Deanna. Is that what we want to be? And so that's kind of what we've got to figure out is, are these shifts taking place as a result of COVID? Are these shifts things that we're comfortable with? Or are they things that we need to push back against? So that's kind of what we're going to be walking through a bit here. So I'll give you an example of this because I realize still there's, I've already given you this example, but I've given it to you in real life because it just happened yesterday. And we're going to have another funeral coming up here. And we had a funeral the week before. So as these things stack up, it doesn't take Einstein to figure out that Deanna and Nancy are going to be getting paid and getting paid and getting paid and getting paid. Can we do that? So it brings up a lot of questions that churches have to wrestle with. So I've already given you that example. How does it get done? Small churches, it gets done by volunteers. Big church is it gets done by paid staff, or we pay people from outside to come and do it. And so the last two are both big church. The first one is small church. Holy Apostles used to run off of a small church model. In fact, most churches, even big churches, run off small church models. I was the youth minister in a church that had averaged 600 on a Sunday. And they ran off of a small church model. They ran off of volunteers. And most of the churches in this diocese run off of volunteers. Doesn't mean that the office or the paid staff doesn't do anything. It just means that when it comes to the ministries of the church, most of the ministries are being accomplished by volunteers. So you're seeing a little bit of a shift taking place. This is all stuff that I've already talked about. The idea being that when you join a church, everybody joins a church and everybody gets involved and is doing some component of ministry. Unless you're too old or you're on a break. And the reason, that's just a reality of things. Some people get too old to get involved in certain activities, and so they're just relaxing. And then other people have been doing certain activities over and over and over and over and over again that they need a break. And so I'll give you a couple examples of this. We are burning our altar guild out at a rate that I am very, very uncomfortable with. We have a super capable altar guild, but we don't have very many of them because nobody wants to volunteer. So we don't have many altar guild. They're very good at what they do, but because there's so few of them, we're actually burning them out. And part of the problem that I have is that sometimes you burn people out and you don't know. You're like, oh, I had no idea. I know. I'm well aware of what we're doing to the altar guild. And it's not healthy. It's not a good thing. Anybody want to join the altar guild? I've got all kinds of spots lined up. But it's one of those things that is just, sometimes people need a break. And you can look at different people and the different jobs that they're in, and you can say, okay, we're going to need that person to get a break. We're going to need Mark to get a break, because if we don't, we're going to run into trouble. We need to get more people up doing what he does, so we're not so dependent upon him, so that he doesn't burn out doing it. It's the same thing that we look at in every ministry. So people obviously take breaks and people obviously get older. But the general idea of the church is if you're not in one of those two categories, you're up and doing something. You're involved. We need you. We need you doing, readers, ushers, whatever the case is. And so it was a lot of small church, even in your larger congregations, like I already said. It's a lot of small church. But churches with younger congregations began to notice a shift a long time ago. I'm talking about the millennials and younger. I don't think that younger generation has a name yet, the generation after millennials. But the millennials and younger, what we begin noticing is in church there's declining volunteerism in that generation. So we've known that for quite a long time. We've known that the millennials do not volunteer at the same clip that baby boomers do. We've always known it. And so you can see this chart of volunteers. This chart's several years old, but we have known that this is taking place. It was declining. But it's specific decline. It's decline in one specific area. So what we've noticed is that there's a sharp decline in volunteerism in one area, and that one area being what we generally refer to as, I think it's up here, what we generally refer to as in-reach, which is a term that I hate, but it is a helpful term that does communicate what I'm talking about. So outreach is we're reaching out to the community. We're feeding the community, either spiritually or we're clothing them, or whatever we're doing that's outreach. Inreach is we're feeding our own people. And there are different types of ministries that happen in the life of the church. So when you come and you're a reader, you're not doing outreach. It's more that you're feeding the body that's already here. When you're an usher, you're not necessarily doing outreach. When you're on altar guild, it's not outreach, it's feeding the body. What we found is that millennials have great interest in outreach and not as much interest in the in-reach. As if they don't necessarily see that as a ministry that they want to partake in. So what churches began seeing is that the younger people are, the less likely they are to volunteer for certain things in the life of the church. Although they will be there to feed the hungry, they will be there to clothe the naked, they will be there to go and do outreach because that's what their heart is, but they're not particularly interested in serving in the church on things like I've listed up here, like working in the kitchen or altar guild or heading up committees and things like that. Not a lot of interest there. So you're seeing declining volunteerism, but it's specific to a certain type of volunteerism that we've never experienced before. But they have no interest. They seem to have no interest in there. Serving on outreach, still very high. So we've seen this. We've known this. The church is famous for being pretty good at identifying things that are coming and really historically bad at adapting for them. We can identify problems that are coming and we can say that's going to be a problem, but we will do absolutely nothing to adjust for the problem that is coming. So what I've been addressing so far is millennials. That doesn't have anything to do with COVID. I've been addressing millennials and the younger generations. One of the things that's kind of, I'm just going to put this all up here. One of the things that I've shared most of this with you is that we've identified problems, and it's kind of very much like this, where you can figure out that you've got to save for retirement, but actually doing it just never takes place. And it's something that just keeps getting kicked down the road. The church never actually prepares. And what they're not preparing for is the absence of baby boomers. Because as the baby boomers age, the millennials are taking their place in the church at a much lower rate. I think the statistics before were that baby boomers attended about 75% church. About 75% of baby boomers attended church in some manner. If you move that to millennials, it's about 25%. That's a huge drop-off. When you're talking about one generation replacing another generation, you're moving from a 75% attendance rate now down to a 25% attendance rate. If you take into account further the non-volunteerism within the church, you can see that this is obviously going to be a problem in the years ahead. So enter COVID. The church has always taken this position, which is we have nothing to worry about. We have plenty of baby boomers out there. We'll be fine for years and years. I'll be retired by the time we have to worry about the millennials replacing the baby boomers. And so we've just pushed it off and pushed it off and pushed it off. And now what you're seeing is that because of COVID, baby boomers and Gen Xers, which is my generation, have now joined millennials in their volunteerism, has backed off. And we've seen it particularly as we've walked through COVID. What we've seen is that there's less interest in volunteering, and you've seen that people are pulling out of things that they had done for many, many years. And there's a lot of theories on why. Maybe, life is too short, and I really want to do what I want to do. Life's too short, I want to make a difference. And I want to be out doing outreach and not inreach, because the general default mindset that people have is outreach makes a difference in people's lives and inreach doesn't. And as wrong as that is still kind of a perception that truly exists out there in the world and in the church. Or they're just easing back into things. Or what I've seen most is that people are resistant to tie themselves back down. So what people have realized as a result of COVID is perhaps I've overcommitted myself. Perhaps I'm involved in so many things that are preventing me from doing other things, and I'm not entirely sure that that is where I want to tie myself down. Does that make sense? I'm going through this right now. I'm looking out at my life and the things that I was involved in and the things that I was doing, and I'm trying to evaluate where I want to tie myself down. Where do I want to continue investing my time, and where do I want to pull back? So I'm not presenting any of this as negative or positive. I'm more presenting it as just what is. So I'm going to open it up. I've said a lot. I'm going to leave it right here, and then we'll move from there. But thoughts, ideas, comments, pushback. Anybody want counseling?
Apparently, when we were doing volunteering, we asked others within our group, age group, to help volunteer. Not a whole lot of us, as older people, went to somebody young and said, hey, come on into our gray-haired group. They don't want to. We're just a bunch of old ladies, or a bunch of old men, or whatever. And so we never made the younger people welcome and change a little bit about our group to make it more comfortable for them.
Yeah, and there's a reason for that. And
You like people like yourself.
yeah. You've hit on it several times whenever you said comfortable.
Yeah.
Because there's a comfort level with the people that we're comfortable with, and whenever we bring younger people in, or whenever we bring men into where women generally are, or whenever we bring black people into where white people generally are, then all of a sudden we've got to adapt, and it's not necessarily as comfortable as it was, because this is our comfort level. And part of what we have to do as a church is be uncomfortable. And you'll grow and you'll learn and you'll be a better human being for it. But I understand the laziness behind that, because I have that. And the laziness behind it is like, I'm so comfortable with what I've got, and this is going to make it really uncomfortable. And now we've got to figure out that. No, we've got to push beyond that, and we didn't do it. And so now we have what we are. And yeah, any other thoughts? Yeah, Britt?
So what the in-service that we need, if that's what we need here, what we lost when COVID hit, people leaving the church for whatever reason or whatever, that's what's bringing the need now for the in-service needs. Is that correct? Or?
Yeah, well, what you're seeing is a shift in people's mindset. And what we knew was coming with millennials, but we thought that was years down the road. We don't have to worry about that. We've got plenty of baby boomers. Now the baby boomers have adapted that same mindset that millennials had because they're reevaluating their life. And so now all of a sudden we have a volunteerism problem. I'll give you another good example at Holy Apostles. We have 2 of our Altar Guild people who, and I'm keep hammering that Altar Guild, but we have 2 of our Altar Guild people that are going on vacation this summer at the same time. And what's going to happen is that I am going to do my own Altar Guilding. Now that's a really good example of what was small church becoming big church. Now the office is doing Altar Guild. And you know, by office I just mean the paid staff. What was volunteers is now being done by big church. So I've got to step in and do it. Now I don't mind doing it, but it's a shift. And we've got to be aware that we're making that shift. And that shift has consequences attached to it. And we've got to know the consequences that are attached to that shift before we make it. But these are the areas where you see that. So setting up in the parish hall for funerals, setting up for Wednesday nights, setting up for our annual meeting, which is completely done by Nancy and Deanna, and the congregation has no involvement in that. The Altar Guild, just a lot of things like that where you're seeing the church taking on more of what the people used to do. So, any other thoughts before I move on, Kay? And then Jack.
Before COVID, because I don't think we need to blame everything on COVID. It's a real good catch-all, but Sherry used to put up a list. Would you help me in the kitchen? This one Sunday a month. And that list was, the page was empty. Nobody ever signed up for it.
Yeah.
And so she did every darn Sunday by herself.
She did.
And if she's not doing it now, I don't blame her. I would say everyone start putting that kitchen again.
Yeah,
It's not her personally, but she's the example.
The Sunday morning kitchen has always been a problem. So we certainly cannot blame that on COVID.
Right.
But there are many areas that we were moving, having volunteers where we're losing volunteers. And to be honest, I don't think that this has plagued Holy Apostles nearly as much as it has plagued other churches that I'm hearing about. So I'm presenting something to you that I don't think has been as much of an issue at Holy Apostles. But I'm hearing from clergy all over the place, this diocese, other dioceses, Presbyterian churches, that this is a real big problem that they're facing. So again, I'm not necessarily talking about problems Holy Apostles has as much as problems that exist in the life of the church as a whole. But using Holy Apostles examples. Sunday, that food back there, always been a problem. My wife has tried. She tried to spark things by bringing donuts, and she'll bring donuts, and then she'll stop, and then there's nothing. And so, Jack.
I think, and I understand what you're saying about recruiting for in-service activities, and I think the best way to do recruiting is for the people involved in those activities to talk it up. You know, we really have fun meeting as Altar Guild, and we laugh and joke around and get our job done. Will you join us? I think that's by far the most effective. Kay and Bill will remember at our previous church, we had a decades-long volunteer coordinator, if you will, that we all learned to avoid, because it was like, Brent and Cindy, welcome to our church. It was your first time here. Would you rather do Altar Guild or kitchen duty? You know, so that got a little bit too much. But if you get the people that actually are involved in those activities and enjoy it.
I don't know, Jack. Those are two problematic areas that I would love to get filled. So if we could greet people like that and it works,
You'd endorse that.
I'm game. I'm totally game.
Well, Agnes wasn't afraid to ask us.
I guess I'll hook you in.
Let's throw her out of retirement.
But I
I'm
gave
lecturing today because
I
of
gave you a
her.
little bit of time. I didn't hit you off right
That's
away.
You're
right.
right.
You wait till the
It was
second
very
Sunday,
subtle.
Right, yeah.
All right, so we're gonna move further down this road because I want you to see some of the things that come about as a result of this. So I forgot to put him up there. There were some really ugly pictures that I couldn't put up there. I just couldn't do it in good conscience. But there's many possible reasons why you're seeing this shift away from volunteerism in church-wise. But the important thing to realize is that it is happening. So the expectations are different. And so the expectations for millennials and younger, as well as now pretty much everybody, is people are looking for, and what they expect in a church is where they don't need to help fix the toilets, they don't need to help decorate for Christmas, they don't need to volunteer with the youth, they don't need to set up tables, and they don't need to cook food. They're looking for a church that has everything in place ready to go. And that's a really big shift. It's a shift away from the church being a place where people volunteer to a place where people go to be spiritually fed, where people go to worship, where people go to engage with the text, a place where people go to do a variety of things, but service isn't necessarily one of those things, at least in-reach service. They look at the church as a place for prayer.
We're going to go do something.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, you're gonna volunteer.
Why are you leaving? So it's a different mindset on why are we coming to church, and it's significantly different. It's the idea of I'm coming to a church where volunteers are not required. So one of the things that we ran into in the church was Vacation Bible School was a difficult thing to pull off. And churches were struggling with it because the fruit from Vacation Bible School wasn't there. But the potential was so great that you couldn't walk away from the potential just because the past fruit wasn't there. So churches either did one of two things, and some churches just walked away from it and said, we're just not going to do it. That's what Holy Apostles did. Probably 6 years ago, we walked away from Vacation Bible School and we said, this is a lot of energy, a lot of effort, a lot of money, and it doesn't produce fruit. And there's valid reasons why it doesn't produce fruit. The reality is that parents, adults, bring kids to church, and kids don't bring adults to church. And anytime you try to flip that model, you're going to flip it on its head. It's not going to work. Churches have tried to do this with youth ministry forever. And they evaluate youth ministries based on how many people they've brought into the church rather than how many people they brought into youth group. And as long as you're evaluating your youth minister on how many people you're bringing into the church, the youth minister is always going to be a failure because the teenagers can come to youth group. Youth meeting after youth meeting after youth meeting, and their parents are never coming to church, especially if you go pick them up, which I made that mistake of doing. And my first time as a youth minister was that I was traveling around picking up a lot of kids. And I would get to their house and the parents are watching TV.
And saying thank you for the babysitting.
And that drove me nuts.
Yeah.
Kids don't bring parents, parents bring kids. That's always how it's worked. You try and flip it, it doesn't work. But you can't tell people that. We're going to hire a youth minister that's going to grow our church. No, it's going to grow your youth ministry, and it may very well grow your church because new families come in and say, do you have a youth ministry program? And you can say, yes, it's vibrant, it's growing, here it is. And then they stay. But it's not going to grow your church by those kids that are in youth group now bring their parents. It just doesn't work that way. So anyways, when we did Vacation Bible School, a lot of churches walked away from it. The churches that didn't, they doubled down on it. and they did it as big and over the top as they could. And to do that, though, they had to charge money, and they forced volunteering. If your kids come to Vacation Bible School, the parents have to volunteer. And that's how they were able to run Vacation Bible Schools, these great giant Vacation Bible Schools. I know because we've tried to sign our kids up for Vacation Bible School. And it always comes with the attached, where are you going to volunteer? It is required. Not always, but often it comes with that. What people are looking for is, how do I plug into a church where I don't have to actually volunteer? And so it's a different mindset. They'll show up, they have everything taken care of. It's full service church with full service facilities. That's what they're looking for. We knew the millennials were looking for this for decades, but we never did anything. And now you have pretty much the entire world is looking for this. So it's not that they want church done by other volunteers, because then they'll feel bad, right? I'm not volunteering. They want it done by professionals, church staff. That's the way that it's structured. That's the way that it's supposed to be. So they come into the church and they don't feel bad that they're not volunteering, because nobody's volunteering. Because church functions differently than the way that it did off of a small church model. Now it's a big church model. So, do we accept it? Do we push back? I know that a lot of clergy and a lot of laity have serious concerns about this trajectory. Clergy especially. I know that there's tons of concerns about it. To be honest with you, my first reaction, or the first reaction that people have to this, is that people are being selfish, is that we need to re-educate them on what the church is, and that they're spiritual narcissists. That's been what the reaction is. To be honest with you, I actually don't have a problem with this. It's just a different way that you're looking at church. And I know that it's not the historic way that we looked at church, but I don't necessarily have a problem with it. But it will take adapting significantly if the church wants to move down this road. Now, the church can dig its heels in and say, we're not doing this. And you can fight against that. And if Holy Apostles wants to do that, I'm all for that. But if Holy Apostles wants to say, no, I think that there's something here, I'm all for that as well. I'm not presenting this as one way is wrong or one way is right. I'm just presenting it as there's a shift taking place, and we need to be aware of it, and we're going to have to adapt to whichever way that we want to go on this shift. So it's a radically different approach. I think that this new approach does offer some real positives to it. And part of the positives that it offers is that the shift of why you go to church immediately refocuses. It's no longer, this is the place where I serve. This is where I do this or where I do this. This is the place where I worship. This is the place where I learn spiritually. This is the place of prayer. This is the place of outreach, place of fellowship. This is my sacred retreat. And you may say, well, you can do all that and serve. And my pushback to you is the church has historically always saw that people show up when they serve. There are people at Holy Apostles that you only see when they're serving. Because Holy Apostles is the place where they serve. And this approach immediately removes that mindset and replaces it with, no, this is the place where you worship. This is the place where you grow spiritually. This is the place where you pray. And so, I do think that there are some positives to this approach. I do realize that there are some areas that are problematic. Okay?
I had a different approach in the beginning, but after seeing those 6 items, every one of those is, I worship, I have learning, I have prayer, it is narcissistic. like you
Well,
said.
let's just say that that's a failure of the person to put the slides together.
No,
Uh,
it's, I don't think so. I think those slides, I think that is a good slide, but if you think about all of it, it is all, what am I getting? It's all about me. It's not about community, and our church is supposed to be a community.
Yeah,
And it can't be a community if we all just go there and do our worshiping and we do our learning, all that stuff. We build community when we have groups, small groups, like everybody likes to call it. But the small groups don't have to be this. They can be small groups of volunteers where you also get to serve, because most Christians know that you should be serving.
Yeah, and the pushback on that is that they're still very much involved in outreach. They're still very much involved in service. So the church still exists as the place through which I serve. It's just that I'm not serving in the in-reach capacity. I'm serving in the outreach capacity. So the church still holds that function. And I would say that they still view this in terms of group. Obviously, you're right. There is an I mentality that can easily creep into this. But I do think that they could do all these things at home if they wanted the I. They come to church to be a part of a community. And to be prayed for, and to pray to other people, and to experience fellowship, all in community. It's just that service piece of InReach is kind of missing, and they're refocusing on these things. So, right or wrong, I don't necessarily know, because this is new. It's new to figuring out how do we actually do this. But I don't think that it's so new that we're jumping the gun talking about it. Because I think that you can see it taking place at Holy Apostles, and you can definitely see it taking place at other churches. Meaning that church becomes a place, and I think this is a really important thing, that the church functions more as a filling station, and ministry happens outside the church. So, in some sense, that people are coming, they're being filled spiritually, and then their ministry is taking place outside of the church rather than in the church. Either through church outreach, or in their neighborhoods, or at their workplace. I've seen some tremendous ministry taking place at workplaces recently. That just blows my mind. What people are doing. People at Holy Apostles, bringing Holy Apostles to their workplace. It's really cool. So it's a shift in where the ministry is taking place, and the church is filling that spot of, this is my filling, this is where I get filled up so that I can pour out when I go out. So I don't have a whole lot of time, so I do want to get to this last slide, and then I'm going to open it up. So consequences here are, it has logical consequences. And the logical consequences are, if you go down this road, you turn into big church. And I'm not gonna belabor the point by going through all this. But if you do use the example of a Sunday school teacher, Holy Apostles has historically had Sunday school teachers, and what they've been is volunteers. Right before COVID, the week before we shut down, I finished my last interview of our Sunday school teachers that we were going to hire. And then COVID happened. And so, and it set us back, and we obviously never got to hire the Sunday school minister that we planned on hiring. But when you do that, that's a shift from small church to big church. That's a shift from, we are now having paid staff do our Sunday school. And you can do that with every single area. So you have either three decisions: small church, volunteers; big church, hired leaders; or no children's ministry. And what it really comes down to is if you want to be big church, you got to pledge big. And if you want to be small church, you got to volunteer big. And those really are the two options. They're the two options presented before the church. And so the other option is, I've said this to Sebastian, who was our foster kid for a year and a half. He didn't want to go to school, so he wanted to drop out of school. So he talked to us multiple times about dropping out of school, and I said, okay, well, if you're going to do that, then you got to get a job. And he said, he didn't want to get a job. And I said, look, Sebastian, you either got to go to school or get a job. One of these two things has to be your thing. And it's the same thing in the life of the church is if we're going to be big church, then we got to pledge big. If we're going to be small church, we've got to volunteer big. Otherwise, what that forces you into is option 3. Option 3 is we have no children's ministry. Or option 3 in any area is, well, we just don't do that because we don't have anybody volunteering and we don't have any money to fund it. But there is a shift that is moving in the church towards a more big church-oriented structure. And I did want to present that to you. I'm going to finish this up next week, and then we're going to move into the last one. 3 minutes for any thoughts, ideas, concerns, all that stuff.
Just real quick.
Yeah.
I think you've analyzed it incredibly well as to what the realities of the situation are. Are you ready to share with us any of your preliminary thoughts of a plan going forward for Holy Cross?
Next week.
All right, fair enough.
Yeah, I mean, what we're looking at is how do we do these two things? How do we wrestle with this? And there's a third element that you add in. And once you add in those third element, which we're going to do at the beginning part of next week, then we're going to look at what are we doing? How do we do this? And so, yes, but not yet.
Okay, fair enough.
All right, you're good to go. Church is starting in, I don't know, 7 minutes, something like that.
The volunteers have to be there before.